Thank you, Adrian. You'll have to forgive her Canadian-French accent on the word image. It's image resources. Before I get started, just one quick question. Show of hands, please, for anyone that has invested in a small resource mining company before. Okay, good. So for the rest of you, I'll apologize that some of my presentation might still have the flair of as if I'm selling, because that's what I do. And in fact, today's presentation is going to be co-hosted by my colleague, Neil Canby of Sunrise Energy. He'll be the one talking about the real meat and potatoes of the solar farm that we're going to be installing with our project. My job really is just to introduce to you the concept of the company and maybe talk a little bit about why we have decided as a small company to adopt solar right from the get-go. So again, forgive me if some of these slides, which were taken right out of my sales presentation, our investor presentation, resonate a little bit differently than just about energy and mining. So to start with, the company is a emerging mineral sands mining company. We're talking about a project that, as you'll see as I go through the presentation, is located just north of Perth. So we definitely are a local company and a small company. And this will be our first venture into mining. It's a very high-grade mineral sands project. And just so that to put a little perspective for those that may not know about mineral sands, the products that come out of a mineral sands mine are what I call stock standard for common industry. For example, zircon and ilmenite, or TiO2, are the two main products that come out of a mine like this. Zircon is used in common things like floor tiles, ceramic floor tiles and wall tiles, but also on high-end items, including zirconium metal, which can be used in nuclear reactors. Whereas the titanium dioxide typically goes into making the ultra-white pigments used in paint and plastics and paper. So these are relatively common items. And what we're mining is actually an ancient beach. Now that's neither here nor there. That just gives you a little perspective for where we are and what we're doing. You can see here, first production expected to be later this year in the fourth quarter. These are some of the overall statistics of the company, and I put them there not to dwell on anything other than you'll notice that our market cap is only about 114 million. And that's to say that solar probably is not just for the bigger companies. I too, like probably many of you, were quite impressed to hear the panel in the first instance yesterday morning from BHP and Rio and Sandfire and Fortescue talk about the bigger side of town, which is exciting and very important. But what I'm here today to say is that it can also work on the low end of town, a $100 million market cap company, and we are taking that first step with a solar project when we don't even have to, and I'll talk more about that in a second. These again start smelling a little bit like some of the investment slides, so forgive me, but they are there. By the way, this is an investment opportunity. We are fully funded now, and we're in construction since about mid-March. We have a very fast build. We'll actually have the project in commissioning in October. We already own the plant and equipment, so we're just relocating it, and I'll show you some pictures about how reasonably simple the plant and equipment is in our case. And as again, first production, fourth quarter, with positive cash flow early next year. So we are one of those companies that's in that, reaching the point of obtaining our full value by getting into production. In addition, we've got an offtake agreement already for 100% of all of our product, and we're going to make a concentrate and ship it bulk to China. There it will be separated into the products that I talked about earlier. Project NPV, we just put out an announcement this morning because the price of zircon keeps going up. The NPV has now increased to 235 million. Very strong rate of return and payback period. And again, though, reasonably small project at 235 million. This is the point about putting these statistics up for today. And yet, again, venturing into solar. As I pointed out, the location is only a little over an hour's drive from the CBD here in Perth to the north. It's in an infrastructure-rich area. That means we already will be connected to grid power. We didn't need this solar headache, if I may use those words. This is a situation where Sunrise Energy actually approached the company and said, what do you think? This is the proposition. And to be honest, as I go through more of this, you'll see that we adopted this sounds very doable, even for a small company. And so Neil will be coming up as soon as I finish introducing some of the other slides on the company and talking more about that. But I have to say I'm very, very proud to be able to stand here and say that the proposition stacked up. That's the best way to put it for us. And again, yesterday morning, you heard that today the bigger companies are looking at a balance between sustainability, economics, and reliability on the energy sources. And even for smaller companies, that obviously is important, and it stacks up. This area that we are going to be mining in, it's our first mine. It's in an area that's been gifted with mineral sands resources for many, many years. Mining has gone on here for 25 years already. We're just joining the foray right in the middle here at this project called Boone and Airing. So it's our first project, but we have many others in the area that we'll be looking at for future growth of the company. And so while we're starting with a solar farm that will supply our first operation, if this all works out, well, we will likely be following a similar, if we can justify it, a similar model for some of our other projects that will be phase 2 growth of the company in the same area. This just shows that from a project capital standpoint, we're one of the lowest cost projects to get into production at about $52 million. That's very low cost, partly because we own our own equipment, secondly because it's a reasonably small operation. But this is also to point out that we don't have big budgets to justify extra equipment like a solar farm when we don't need it. So again, as you get into maybe some of the Q&A with us, we'll tell you about how we work that out to be equitable both for the solar company and for the mining company. This slide is just to show again some of the base assumptions we use in our economics for the overall project, not the solar piece of it, just the project itself. And you'll see that 500 tons per hour is a reasonably small mine. This is a small open cut mine, so it's straightforward, very simple. And the project just uses gravity separation. So as you see the equipment here in the next slide or so, you'll realize it's relatively simple. And yet, again, as most of us know, the devil is always in the details. This is a picture of what we call the wet separation plant. It's a gravity separator. The slurry gets mined. And by the way, I mentioned that we mine an ancient beach, which is buried down about 20 meters. So we're actually mining sand off this ancient beach, which is rich in minerals, heavy minerals. The sand gets slurried in the mine, pumped to this plant as a slurry, and then is gravity separated. And the heavy mineral comes out the backside as a rich black sand. The rest of the sand gets returned back to the mine. About 8% of the sand has got heavy mineral in it. These are just showing that as of 2 weeks ago, we are well advanced on construction of the project. And so, Neil, I'll remind you, we're going to need some power pretty soon. You'll see here that the open cut mine is well advanced. You can see that the civils work for the plant in the lower picture is already well progressed, all the concrete. In fact, today there's more of the structure already in place. The graph of the schedule simply shows that we're on a very fast burn to another 3 months or so before we start commissioning the project and then marching right into production. My last slide is simply that, to tell you that we are adopting solar. It's going to provide approximately 25% of our total energy needs. It's one that works, I believe, for both the company and for the solar company. And it'll be there as a solar farm for many, many years to come, even beyond when the mine is depleted and perhaps we move on to another location. I'm going to, at this time, ask Neil to come up and talk on the next few slides, which gives you effectively the meat and potatoes about the solar program. So thank you for that. And I would be remiss for those of you who raised your hands that on our website we have the full package of presentation for the investment opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. Which way do we go? Yep, the big green one, not the small green one. Go on. Now I've got to go back. Okay, so what are we actually doing? Let's take you through the plan and status of the solar farm that we're building. So it's going to be a 3 to 4 megawatt solar farm in output terms. That's effectively sized to meet the load profile of the mine, probably in about year 3 of operations. It will be single access tracking, which is important. I'll explain as to why that single access tracking is important in a little while. We will actually connect the solar farm to the embedded network at the mine, and it will be configured so it won't actually export any power to the grid. So effectively, if you understand some of the legislation, it means that Image, who will effectively generate the asset, the electricity from that asset, will be the end user of that asset. We're using land that is owned by Image Resources, located next to the mine. You can see the red shape in the middle. It won't be land they can mine. On the right-hand side of that red space is 2 gas pipelines, and on the left-hand side is a 330 kV overhead network. So it is land that will never be mined because of the critical infrastructure that actually flows through that area. So quite interesting that we can put a solar farm there. Where we are at the moment is we're in the development phase, so we expect to submit our application to the Shire in about 2 weeks. We've submitted our embedded generation application to inquiry to Western Power, and that's going through assessment at the moment. So why do this? So firstly, I want to step back and talk about the importance of this concept for everyone in WA, and then I'll focus on the value specific to Image Resources. So for those of you that aren't in WA, apologies, this is quite WA-centric, and for those of you in WA who are not on the Swiss, apologies, this is very WA-Swiss-centric. So we have a real challenge as a West Australian community because our network is big, it's very sparse, highly underutilised for its capacity, and it's old. Western Power themselves, so that the slide component on the right-hand side, have clearly started indicating to us that we need to move from the current integrated network strategy more likely to the modular network strategy, which basically means a combination of a centralised network as it exists today with branch networks, islanded systems and standalone power systems. And certainly Western Power can give you lots of insight into this. Key to making this work is distributed generation. So you're not going to get a network company achieving the network outcomes it's looking for if we don't build generation in the right spots. And if you know the West Australian structure, you know that Western Power can't build generation. So we've got to think differently about the architecture we need across the entire system. Secondly, whilst we have a very high adoption of rooftop solar within WA, what we're finding is it's not solving our capacity problem. So if you understand how the capacity market in WA works, you know it's based on a few days of peak usage allocated across all the NIMI's consumption at that point in time. And the lower right-hand side is a graph put forward by the AMO recently. So this year we peaked on the 13th of March at 5:30 p.m. And at that point in time, the 800 megawatt rooftop power station that exists was producing 11 megawatts. So the more rooftop we put on, the more problem this becomes. So we need to start thinking about generation that actually addresses that peak component as well. So if we're going to put in behind the meter stuff, we need to be trying to put in behind the meter that stops increasing the amount of capacity we need to buy. And if you look at our load profile, the bottom left-hand side, you know, the market buys capacity of 4,500 megawatts. This was Friday's graph. You can see we're at about 2,100 megawatts. So we have a lot of capacity that exists. Even on our very hottest days, we only just beat 3,500 megawatts. So key to that is building the right sort of generation, which can produce at the right times, and building the right size. So if you don't understand the importance of risk diversification, again, that generation portfolio, we've got 2,200 megawatts at the time that was operating and a spinning reserve of 352 megawatts, about 15% spinning reserve. Why are we doing that? Well, we've got very large coal-fired power stations, 300 megawatt coal-fired power stations. Spinning reserve requires us to have at least 200 megawatts of spinning reserve to support one of those units going. So as we move to a generation of the future, if we keep building 300 megawatt things, we're going to still need 200 megawatts of spinning reserve. So we are a small system, and we need to start thinking a bit differently about our small systems. So we advocate that we really need to start thinking collectively as an industry around the shape of our electricity system going forward, which benefits everyone. If we can bring down the amount of capacity that the market has to buy, everyone benefits. If we can bring down the amount of spinning reserve that's required to manage the system, everyone benefits. And how does Image Resources benefit from that? Is it just the socially beneficial component of being seen to be doing the right things? Well, a bit, but there's also there's economic savings for Image Resources. So Image will buy the power and the LGCs from the solar farm. The solar farm is expected to reduce the individual reserve capacity requirement for Image Resources. When those peak period pricing points occur, or measurement points occur, a single access tracking system has a very, very high likelihood of producing fairly significant power at that time, meaning that Image at that point in time will be drawing very little power from the network. Obviously, the LGC pricing is at a point where Image can take the LGCs that are produced in the solar farm and give those to the retailer, which effectively is a much lower way of achieving their LGC obligations. If you understand embedded generation, it's not a renewable thing, but if the generator and the end user are the same and no power is consumed by anyone else, then embedded generation is exempt from LGC or generation exemptions, so don't pay RECs on that component. Behind the meter means you're not on the market, so you avoid other things like market fees and services. And obviously you avoid line losses because you've effectively generated power straight from the solar farm. And what we see for this is typically for a client like Image Resources, the expected annual savings in the region of $75,000 to $100,000 per megawatt AC that we install. So if it's 3 to 4 megawatt AC, I'll leave you to do the maths as to what expected outcomes are. On top of that, Image Resources get a lease income from us for the land that is on at least a 20-year lease, because if Image Resources move on from that mine in 8 years, then we're connected to the network, albeit at the moment as an embedded network. It doesn't take a lot of effort to change that solar farm to be network connected and independent. And I would hope within 8 years' time we would have solved the problems of connection within Western Australia. Final slide for me is also the social benefits. So again, across all of Western Australia, a graph provided from the AEMO for the last 12 months, how much have we consumed in Western Australia across the market? Well, 49% of that consumption is coal, 40% is gas, 8.8% is wind, and the balance is other. Now, clearly for rooftop solar that doesn't participate in that metric, it's not in there. So, but that's where we stand today. And I'm sure those of you in the industry know that it's hard to get large renewable projects connected at this point in time because of some of the constrained access rules or unconstrained access rules, however we call them. We have significant challenges in that space. But more importantly, even if you could connect, we have an overcapacity supply in WA. We already have more generation than we need. We have more generation than our capacity credits available. There are a lot of power stations that sit idle that we're underutilising. So we've got to find smarter ways as to how we get renewable energy into the system that makes sense and doing it now. Otherwise, we're not going to move much from that profile over the next 3 to 5 years, and we will be probably last in the country in terms of renewable adoption. What we're also doing is investing in regional infrastructure. So there's a very strong requirement in Western Australia for us to think about stopping that migration from the country, the rural areas, into the city. This is about putting infrastructure back into the regional areas. 50% of the capital from our solar farm is expected to be spent with WA businesses. So civil works, the construction work, all the electrical work. So a fair component of that is people time and local equipment rented and used. And I think for us, this is about, and the leadership, to be honest, that Image have shown in this is this stimulating thinking around renewable energy adoption. Both the distributed generation deployment, about putting generation right next to the load, and doing it in an industry that perhaps has not been seen to be a strong adopter of renewables to date. Some of the social benefits specific to Image Resources. So they get a relationship with the Shire. Obviously, they have a social licence to operate that they have to maintain within that Shire. And they can actually talk to the Shire about seeing another $8 million invested in that Shire on top of the $52 million they're investing. That's quite a significant uplift on a $52 million project. It's productive use of land that otherwise was going to sit there doing nothing. So it's not like we're taking highly productive farmland and using it for solar. We're taking land that was effectively going to be a cost for Image to maintain and keep, and turning it into a usable output. So there's some social benefits for them in that regard. We've committed to, and not surprisingly, the economics make sense for us to employ local contractors for our construction operation. Some of them will be the same contractors that are used with Image Resources that come in to do civil works. We'll probably use the same civil works company to come in and do our work. And there is, and I'm telling some of the people in this industry how to suck eggs, but there is now quite a lot of interest in what we call the green fund investment. So organisations or funds that are looking to invest in both the solar assets that we create, but also the companies that are adopting the output of that. So mining companies that are seen to be adopting and moving to a higher renewable energy portfolio are starting to get that sort of green fund attraction. So that, in summary, that's the economic and social benefits that Image and broadly the community will benefit from that project. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil. Thanks very much, Neil and Patrick. We have time for a couple of questions from the audience. Is it still too early?